This is the second class of this particular subject, this particular topic on Canterbury Tales. As I'd already said in yesterday's class, that the Canterbury Tales is the greatest literary work of Geoffrey Chaucer, and Geoffrey Chaucer is known as the father of English poetry. And I had already introduced you to the Canterbury Tales in yesterday's class. I already told you that the general prologue to Canterbury Tales, which is part of the syllabus, is an introduction to the different kinds of pilgrims and the different social ranks that they belong to. So here amongst the pilgrims, there is also the introduction of Chaucer himself. Now I'll tell you about the plan of Canterbury Tales. Remember, Canterbury Tales is a work that is unfinished, which means that the original plan of Chaucer was to create a longer tale, but he could not finish it. So what was the plan of Canterbury's Tales? I would like to say that. And please follow page number 12. This book is easily available on the website of SOL. So you can get the PDF from there. I also got the PDF from that place itself. At the outset, let me talk about the plan of the Canterbury Tales. At the outset, Chaucer had declared his intention of describing each pilgrim according to a certain set plan. Had he kept to this plan, the general prologue might have been a string of drab, dull, monotonous, and repetitive portraits. So he had planned that each pilgrim will tell a story about his or her life, and each one will present their lives in a distinctive way. But it would have been a very boring exercise. So as it however happens, Chaucer deviates markedly, so he decides to do something else, and we find no two portraits being painted. Sorry. A lot of background noise. Anyone whose mic is on, please switch off your mics. Please mute your mics.
Sir, can you please tell me which book are you using to teach this?
सर आप अपनी साइड से सबके माइक ऑफ कर दो वरना आवाज आती रहेगी।
सर कौन सी बुक से पढ़ा रहे हो?
Okay, I can see a lot of raised hands. So if you want to speak, I'm giving you one chance here. So just one by one, you can ask your question. Yes, Preeti Rai, what do you want to ask? Please unmute yourself. I can see a raised hand. Preeti Rai, do you want to ask anything? Okay, next Komal, you want to ask anything? If there's any. Any question you want to ask at this stage, you can go ahead. We have started the discussion of Canterbury Tales in the last class, and we are continuing with the discussion. So this book, this PDF is available on the SOL website. You can go to BA English Honors second semester in reading materials. You can see it in the section called British Poetry and Drama, 14th to 17th century. And within this, you will find in this particular PDF. So you can get this easily. Before moving on, if you have a particular question, Kushi Kumari, if you want to ask anything, please unmute yourself and ask.
I just want to say कि आप ऐसे पर्टिकुलरली सबसे पूछने के बजाय चैट्स देख लेंगे सबके तो बेटर होगा.
Sorry?
I was saying कि instead of asking everyone particularly, why don't you just see the chats?
Chats are visible here. I can't see anything on chat. If you have anything to ask, please ask.
I will after the class.
Sarthak Jory, you want to ask something?
सर कौन सी बुक से पढ़ा रहे हो सर आप? सर
ये
एसएल के
SOL
स्टडी
वेबसाइट में
मटेरियल
है 14 to 17th सेंचुरी जो फर्स्ट यूनिट है वहीं से पढ़ा रहा हूँ. आप काइंडली उसे देखिए, उसे फॉलो कीजिए.
ये जो बुक मिली है एसएल से सर इसमें तो 12 पेज पे कुछ और ही लिखा है.
तो आप SOL के वेबसाइट में जाइए, इसका सॉफ्ट कॉपी भी अवेलेबल है. बीए इंग्लिश ऑनर्स सेकंड सेमेस्टर में देखिए 14 to 17th सेंचुरी.
वही सर स्टडी मटेरियल ही तो दिए हुए हैं वहाँ भी.
तो अगर आपके पास नहीं है तो SOL वेबसाइट में देखिए ना. मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ इस चीज को लेके?
नहीं सर स्टडी मटेरियल है उसी की तो बात कर रहा हूँ मैं कि उसमें तो 12 पेज पे कुछ और दे रखा है. आप जो
बेटा
दिखा रहे
बहस मत करो. आप सर जो कह रहे हो वो सुनो पहले.
Okay, so instead of taking questions, now let me proceed. Okay, as I was saying, the plan of Canterbury Tales, I've shared the PDF again. You can follow this. I'm just repeating once again that this is available on the SOL website. You can go to reading materials, BA English Honors second semester, and you can just see that on the left hand side, you'll find materials on this particular paper, which is British Poetry and Drama, 14th to 17th century. We have started with the first unit. You open the first unit, you'll see the same PDF file, which I have opened in front of you all. So as I was saying that the plan was that each pilgrim will say about their stories, their lives, and general prologue will make a list. I had said in yesterday's class, the general prologue is a kind of an introduction to the Canterbury Tales. And here variety becomes a guiding principle. So each and every character has a different story to tell about themselves. So here they are telling their stories, what are their lives about and how they have fared in their life and how they have come forward. No single method of presentation therefore becomes dominant, and we have portrait ranging from 9 lines to 62 lines. Now the opening lines celebrate the coming of spring. So I want you to read the first general prologue. I'm skipping a bit here because these things we can discuss later as well. So this is how the general prologue begins. This is the text. The portion that I skipped are critical readings, which we can do later. But this is where the text starts of the general prologue. And the first line to the 18th line has been described here. When that April with his showers suit, the drought of March had Persedo the root, the holy blissful martyr for to seek that hen at Holpen when that they were sick. So this is the detailed paraphrase. A summary has been provided along with the lines. Now look at the lines. This is the language of English, but this was very, very old. This kind of English language we do not use now. This Middle English language, which was used during the time of Chaucer only. So what is he saying here? When that April with his showered suit, the drought of March had preceded the root. So the author is talking about the month of April with which he begins the story. When April with its sweet showers has pierced the drought of March to the root. So April is a time when people go to pilgrimage. April is a time which brings about a lot of rain and brings about a lot of breeze, and the weather becomes good at this point of time. And every vein of the plant. So what happens when there is a lot of rain? The vein of the plants look very, very beautiful. On each liquid or sap that has the power to bring about the flowering of the plants. When the west wind zephyr also with its sweet breath has in every wood and filled breath life into the young plants, and young sun has run half its course in the zodiac signs. So the first line describes the beauty of the month of April, that we witness uh, a lot of rains during the month of April, and it is a beautiful time, and people in England during those times used to go for pilgrimage. So this is how the general prologue begins. Now remember, this is the reference to the weather of England. In India during the April month, we do not find any rains. The weather is quite difficult here. The weather is full of heat. There's the month of summer going on in India, but back in England, April is a time when it was a beautiful time and people used to go for pilgrimage because the weather was very beautiful. Now, what is the comment here? In this first 18 lines of the prologue, Chaucer has built a very effective case in favor of a pilgrimage. He sets the scene in springtime. Springtime is just the time before summer comes in. And there is always natural blooming and a breeze of cold air blowing through this particular month. Month of April to be exact, and structures the passage on a pattern of cause and effect. When certain conditions develop in the natural world, then certain corresponding events take place in the world of men. The regenerative power of spring that is felt in nature and can be seen in the flowering plants and the singing birds finds its equivalent in the desire in human beings for a regeneration that is not physical but spiritual. So he's saying, just like the springtime, when everything gets a new life, like the fruits, like the flowers, like the birds, that they get new life because there's a rejuvenation. The weather becomes very beautiful. So the human beings also have this particular habit on going on a particular pilgrimage. They feel that this is the time we should go on a pilgrimage so that we can also bring some better things within our lives. So why do people go for pilgrimage? To go nearer to God and bring about some positive feelings within their life. So springtime, the month of April, was a time in those conditions in England that people considered that this was the time to go for a pilgrimage and also to have an idea about better aspects of the life. The logical sequence is built up in the first few lines using the word van and repeatedly, linking various examples to illustrate the pattern of cause and effect. Thus, when this happens and this too, then also this happens. So when on one side April brings about a better weather, a scene where the plants, the animals get a better life. So the human beings also want to get a better sense of life by going on a pilgrimage, by reaching out to the external God, by reaching out to the Almighty to understand the better meaning of life. That is how it begins. The lines of general prologue begin in this way. Now from lines 19 to 34. Befell that in that season and a day in Southwark at the Tabard as I lay, and made forward early for to rise, to take our way there as near now devise. So he's saying that we shall go forward now, and we are going. I had said that in yesterday's class that these pilgrims are going on a pilgrimage towards Southwark, to the shrine of Thomas A. Becket. And the first person tells us that it so happened that one night as he lay in the Tabard Inn. So they are all sitting in one place known as the Tabard Inn. Tabard Inn is a kind of a hotel or a place to rest where they are taking some gap while they are moving towards the final destination. The first person speaker tells us that it is so happened that one night as he lay at the Tabard Inn in Southwark, ready to go on his pilgrimage to Canterbury with a very devout spirit. That same night, about 9:20 people came into that hostelry. So there were 29 pilgrims. So they said, to pass our time and to make good use of this time, we will tell stories related to our lives. And this became a collection of Canterbury Tales. And we just are reading the introduction, that is the general prologue of Canterbury Tales, where we are introduced to each of these characters and we get to know about the lives of each of these characters. It was chance that had brought such widely different people together in one group. They were all pilgrims and were also waiting to ride to Canterbury the next morning. The bedrooms and the stables of the inn were spacious and comfortable, and they were all accommodated in the best way. After a short while, when the sun had set, means when there was darkness, the narrator tells us that he had managed to speak with each one of them so that he was part of their group straight away. So the author was trying to uh, become friends with the other people, make friends with the other pilgrims, and tell about the stories. They made an agreement to rise early next day and set off on their way. So next I move on to the next lines, lines 35 to 42. But not less. But not less means but not less. So this is archaic use of English language. You see, English language back then was very different from the language we use now and we see now. While I have time, T-Y-M-E, now we say T-I-M-E. The same thing, while I have time and space, or er means before, that I further in this stale pace, and eke in what array that they were ein, and at a night while I first began. The first person narrator continues. Now he lays out a plan. He says that while he has time and space, so now they decide that since they have the time and they will go about in the pilgrimage and have a lot of time and have to spend a time with each one of themselves. So what they will do, that before he moves further in his tale, he is going to describe these pilgrims. So he will tell about these pilgrims. Who are these pilgrims and who are accompanying him in what way? So next, the tales start. The first tale is that of the knight. Who is a knight? A knight is a soldier. A knight is someone who defends the country. A knight is a warrior. A knight is a fighter. So the first person who decides to tell his story is the knight. A knight there was and was a worthy man, that fro the time hath he first began, the knight. For he was late come from his voyage and went for to do his pilgrimage. So here Chaucer begins the portrait by telling us that there was a knight, Knight. Knight is a soldier who fights for honor, who defends his motherland, who is a worthy person, who was a worthy man, who from the time that he had first began to ride out loved chivalry. Chivalry means something that he gets honor out of protecting people. Truth, honor, freedom, and courtesy. He had proved himself worthy in his lord's wars and had fought wars in such far off places that no man had gone farther than him. A long list of his expeditions and achievements follows. Chaucer tells us that the knight had fought in Christian as well as heathen lands, that the knight had fought in many places. He had fought battles and was honored for his worthiness. He was at Alexandria, it's the name of a place, Alexandria, when it was born, and he had also occupied the place of honor many times about knights of all nations in Prussia. So the knight had got all kinds of recognitions. The knight was well known for his bravery. The knight was well honored by all the people around. So knight is an epitome of bravery, manhood, and something that is well deserving. He had also campaigned in Lithuania and Russia, often that no Christian man had ever done. So he had done something which no other human being could ever do. He had also been at Algiers and Morocco, as well as Is and Atalia when they were won, and in the Mediterranean, he had been at many noble expeditions. He had been at 15 mortal battles and had fought for Christian faith in Tlemcen 3 times in formal duels. So these are the wars that he has fought. Chaucer once again calls the knight worthy and tells us that his same worthy knight had at one time been with the Lord of Ballot, another heathen in Turkey, and had an outstanding reputation. So the knight is an epitome of a great person, a great man. So there's hardly anything wrong with this person. Chaucer tells us that although he was worthy, he was wise too, and of his manner he was as meek as a maid. He was very gentle. He used to respect all of them. And throughout his life, he had fought for royalty and fought for the honor of people. So this was the kind of man, this was the kind of people he's talking about. He never spoke a rude word. He was never rude to anyone in all his life to any sort of person. He was a truly perfect gentle knight. But to tell about his clothing, Chaucer says that though his horse was good, the knight himself was not gaily dressed. He wore a tunic of coarse cloth, all stained by the marks of his armor, for he had recently come back from his expedition and came straight away to do his pilgrimage. So this was the first character, the knight, who has been described in all positive ways. That the knight is the most important character and the knight is the worthiest character. The knight has not done anything wrong in his whole life. So next, we move on to the next lines. These are the word meanings. If you don't follow it, you can easily follow them from here. Line 79 to 100. With him, there was also his son, a young squire. With him, he had his young son, who was a squire. Squire is some person who is also brave, but was not a knight, but in future he will become a knight, a lover and lusty bachelor. Courteous he was, lowly and sevicel, and carve before his fadder at a table. Now, this detailed paraphrase, I want everyone to read very carefully. The second character, the second portrait in the gallery is the squire, Squire, who is the son of the knight, who is a smaller version of the knight, but he was a very different person. So everyone, please read the detailed paraphrase, which is the 2 paragraphs, which you can see on your screen. I'm giving you 2 to 3 minutes here. Everyone, please read and understand the importance of the square. And then after 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I will again resume. So everyone, please read, after which I'll explain, and then we can have some questions. But please read the detailed paraphrase of the square. Okay, I hope by now you have all read it. So this is about the square, and the kind of character that Square was has been described here, who is the second portrait in the gallery. His appearance has been described, which is quite different from that of the knight. He is also a brave person, but the Square has different other kinds of talents as well. Like he is a good singer, he is a charmer, and he loved so passionately that at night time he slept no more than a nightingale. So you can see the young Square is next in line in social hierarchy. He is training to become a knight, but will his father's life is devoted to his religious and military obligations, the young son's life revolves around love. So he is also a good character, but his life is quite different. Now we'll move on to the next character. So one by one, you'll see these kind of characters coming in, and they will present their life in a particular way, and they will present what is good and bad in their lives. The yeoman. A yeoman had he and servants Namo at that time for himless so, and horn he bar. The balked was of green, a forester was he, smoothly as I guess. So next third portrait is that completes the military group of pilgrims. So there are different sections of people who belong to religious life, people who belong to the military life, people who are common and do very small jobs. They are also part of this pilgrimage group. The third portrait is that of a yeoman, Yeomeman. He tells us that the knight had a yeoman and no more servants. In other words, the yeoman too was in service of the knight, and at that time it pleased him to ride with him in this manner. He was clothed in a cloak and coat and a hood of green. So he was wearing this particular thing and carried a sheaf of peacock arrows under his belt very properly. He knew well how to take care of his equipment, and none of his arrows fell short of their target because of drooping feathers. In his hand, he carried a mighty bow because he was a soldier as well. He had closely cropped hair and a brown face. He knew the skills of woodcraft. Upon his arm, he wore a bracer or an arm guard to protect his arm against the bowstring. And on one side, he carried a sword and a shield, while on the other an elegant dagger, which was well ornated and as sharp as the point of a spear. He wore a bright silver medal on his breast representing Saint Christopher. So he was wearing a silver medal as well. He carried a horn and the shoulder strap was green. Chaucer guesses that he must be a forester. So this is the three characters have been complete. All of them belong to the military profession: the knight, the squire, and the yeoman. Now, before moving on to the fourth character, I would unshare the screen and ask you people if you have any questions to ask. If there are any questions, you can ask in the chat box. I'm giving you 2 to 3 minutes here. You can ask in the chat box. If you want to write something, I'm waiting for 1 minute. You can post in your questions and I'll answer them. Or you can raise your hands and I will take one question. Maybe just raise your hand because I think the chat is disabled here. Just raise your hand one by one. Yes, Sadaf, you can unmute yourself and speak. Sadaf
Good
Mirza.
afternoon,
Yes.
sir. Good
Yes, good
afternoon,
afternoon.
sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, please describe the yeoman's character again.
Okay, I'll do that. Any other question? Deepa.
So can you describe the character of square again?
I've already described the square in details. What happened? Prachi?
गुड आफ्टरनून सर.
Yes.
सर इसमें ग्लोसरी एंड एक्सप्लेनेटरी नोट्स का क्या रोल है?
जो डिफिकल्ट पार्ट्स हैं वो आपको समझा दिया जाएगा, जहाँ पे, क्योंकि यहाँ पे डिफिकल्ट वर्ड्स यूज किए गए हैं ना, उन वर्ड्स के मीनिंग्स दिए गए हैं वहाँ पे, ठीक है?
तो सर ये एग्जाम से रिलेटेड है, मतलब ये वर्ड्स आ सकते हैं एग्जाम्स में?
नहीं, वर्ड्स नहीं आएंगे, क्वेश्चंस आएंगे, बट आपको
ओके,
समझने के
थैंक यू
लिए तो
सर.
वर्ड्स मीनिंग जानने पड़ेंगे ना, इसलिए दिया हुआ है.
ओके, थैंक यू सर.
Anyone else? Prachi, you want to ask something?
नो सर.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Kritika Singh, please ask.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Kritika, good afternoon.
Well, I was reading the comment and there is a line that says Chaucer seems to be administration for this discipline and yeoman's professional skill thereby. There is a word written, dress his tackle yeomanly. What does it mean? Dress his tackle yeomanly.
See, I can't understand. Where did you get this question? I don't know. You have to make me understand the context. First, let me complete the Chaucer, the whole part of Chaucer, then only I can answer these things. Where did you get this question?
Okay.
Please follow the book that has been prescribed by SOL and not others. Yes, Diksha? Diksha, if you want to ask something, please go ahead.
No, sir. Yes. So actually, I just wanted to ask, the human was in service of the knight. Am I correct?
Yes. The
Thank
square is also part of the knight. The yeoman is also part of the knight. The square is actually the son of the knight.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Ritika.
So what is the basic difference between the square and the knight?
The basic difference between square and the knight is that the knight is a person who gives value to royalty, who gives value to serving the nation, whereas the square is someone who likes singing, dancing as a young boy and gives more value to love and other emotions. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Any other person has a question? Last 1 minute.
गुड आफ्टरनून सर.
Yes. Please
सर
go
कल
ahead.
की क्लास में क्या हुआ था?
कल के क्लास में मैंने डिस्क्राइब किया था who was Chaucer, the introduction to general prologue, and also we had talked about who gave him this idea of writing this particular general prologue and all that.
थैंक यू सर.
और कोई क्वेश्चन है किसी का? Any other questions anyone wishes to ask? Okay, fine then. So I'll continue. Let's move ahead to the next character. The Prioress. This is the fourth character. Remember, by now we were talking about the military characters only. Military characters as in people who are engaged in warfare, people who fight to defend their motherland. Now we have the Prioress. The Prioress is part of the church. The Prioress belongs to the religious part of the society. There was also a nun, says Chaucer, a prioress who was very simple and modest, and her greatest oath was by Saint Loy, and her name was Madame Eglantine. She sang the divine service very well, intoning in her nose in a graceful manner. So she was part of the church service. And when you are part of a church service, you have to sing the divine songs. And she was very expert in that. She also spoke French very well and elegantly in the accent of the school of Stratford at the Bow, because she is not familiar with the French spoken in Paris. At meals, she was conducting herself well, for she had excellent table manners and never let a morsel fall from her lips, nor did she wet her fingers in the sauce. So she was one person who was very careful and could manage a lot of things at the same time. She knew well how to carry a morsel in her mouth and be careful that not a drop fell upon her breast. Her greatest pleasure in life was adhering to good manners and etiquette. She wiped her upper lip so clean that she left no greasy marks on her cup after she had drunk from it. She reached out for her food in a very seemly manner. So she was very excellent in table manners and could reach out to different ways. Surely, says Chaucer, she was of excellent behavior and very pleasant and amiable in her manner. She took pains to imitate the manners of the court and to be considered worthy of reverence. So she had very good manners, but to speak of her conscience or sensibility, she was so charitable and so compassionate that she would weep if she saw a mouse caught in a trap and if it were dead or bleeding. She had some small dogs that she fed with roasted meat, of milk and white bread. But she wept bitterly if one of them were dead or if someone hit it smartly with a stick. Then she was all full of feeling and tender heart. So you see, every aspect of a person has been described. What kind of a person that lady was, what was the feelings for the others. Was she a kind-hearted person? Was she lovable person? Was she respected by the others and everything? Her wimple was pleated. This is how she dressed herself in a very becoming manner. Her nose were well formed and her eyes were grey as glass. Her mouth was very small and soft and red, and she also had a fair forehead, which Chaucer thinks was almost a span broad, and he also adds that she had a good figure. Her cloak was very well made, and she wore around her arm a string of coral beads with large green gaudies in between, and from it hung a brooch of gold. She was wearing a locket, a brooch of gold, written on it followed by Amor vincet omnia, which means love conquers all. So she was one person, the prioress was one person who was very, very lovable. She used to love everyone and she used to respect the others' feelings as well. So that is why she was attached to the animals as well. So beautiful character has been shown out here. Let's skip a bit of the description. Please, you can read by yourselves. All these words have been explained for you. Next, the monk. The monk comes as the next character, the fifth character. The monk is also part of the church. A monk there was, a fair for the mastery, and out there the loved neverly. So there was a monk, says Chaucer, who was extremely fine at that, and he was an outrider and loved hunting. So he was a monk, but he loved hunting. He was a manly man, but thus qualified enough to an abbot. He had many fine horses in his stables. He was a monk, but he had many horses. So he was a man of pleasure. He loved to live his life. And when he rode, people could hear his bridle bells jingling in the whistling winds as clear and as loud as do the chapel bells there where this lord was in charge of the subordinate monastery. The rule of Saint Maurice or of Saint Benedict was not followed by this monk because it was old and somewhat strict. He let the old things pass away and followed the more relaxed or liberal customs of modern times. He gave not a plucked hen for text, for say the hunters are not holy men, not that a monk out of his cloister. So the next paragraph. So he was a person who loved pleasure. So he was a corrupt person. On one side, he was a monk. On the other side, he practiced hunting. So what kind of a monk is he? Continuing in his first person Chaucer, the narrator observes that the sleeves of the monk's coat were lined with fur and that too finest in the land, and to fasten his hood, he now looks at the appearance of the monk. The monk was wearing expensive things, which a monk should never wear, because a monk is a person who has left all kinds of pleasures and who has left all kinds of thing in this world. To fasten his hood Under his chin, he had a very finely crafted pin made of gold in the shape of an elaborate love knot. His head was bald and shone like glass, as did his face like it and had rubbed with oil. He was quite plump, and his eyes were prominent and rolling in his head and gleamed like a furnace of lead. His boots were supple and his horse is in excellent condition. Now, certainly, we can say that he was a handsome church official. He was not a pale or tormented ghost. So he earned money from other sources. So, as a monk, he loved luxury. So, that points towards the corruption that was prevalent during uh, Chaucer's time in the church. That is why you see one by one he presents characters who are good, who are bad, who are commonplace, and who's present different aspects of this society. So the monk is definitely a corrupted person. Now let's move on to the next character. And this goes on, the friar. The friar, there was a one town and a mare and a limb and false him man. As Doon, the steers in the frosty night, this worthy limb was clept Hubert. Now see how the friar has been described. Now I ask everyone to read about the friar. You see what a friar is and who a friar is. Friar is also part of the church. He is one person who is also part of the corruption of the church. Friar. So again, I'm giving you 2 minutes to read the first paragraph. Just read the first paragraph only. Take 2 to 3 minutes, and I'll again resume and explain what the friar here is trying to do. So just read the first paragraph of the detailed paraphrase about the friar. Just read the first paragraph and pay attention to each and every terms that is being said here. He has described in every detail. The weather, the manner is very, very detailed. So please follow the details. I'm giving you 2 to 3 minutes again. Everyone, please read and then I'll again explain. Okay, I hope by now you have read it. The friar is a wanton and a merry one, a limiter and a very solemn man. So he was someone who was all for pleasure. And his description has been provided by Chaucer. As he said, his hood means the cap which he wears, was stuffed full of knives and pins to give to fair wives. And certainly he had a merry voice. He knew well how to sing and play on a rote. Of singing ballads, he absolutely took the prize. His neck was white as the lily flower. Furthermore, he was strong as a champion. He knew the taverns well in every town, also every innkeeper and barmaid better than he knew a leper or a bar beggar woman. So he was interested in women. So he could flirt and frolic as if he were a young puppy. He knew how to help settle disputes on love days, for there he was not like a cloistered monk with a threadbare cloak like a poor scholar, but he was like a master of arts or a pope. His short cloak was woolen and rounded as a bell fresh formed the press. In his affectation, he lisped somewhat to make his English sweet upon his tongue, and his harping when he had sung, his eyes twinkled in his head exactly as do the stars on a frosty night. So he was one person, though he was part of a church, but he was one person who loved to flirt and be amongst women. So you can see that this is also part of corruption, that a church person who should have been religious and outright and good, this person is also engaged in something which is not expected from him. Next character, again, we shall move a few lines here. All these words you can read, I'm not going into the explanation, is the merchant. A merchant is always a person with a greedy mind because he is always looking for profit. A merchant was there with a forked beard, and mortally and high on horse he sat. Forsooth, he was a worthy man and ale, but sooth to say, I not him, men him call. There was a merchant with a forked beard. So his beard was like a fork. I hope you have seen a fork. So he had a beard like a fork, wearing multicolored clothes. Of course, a merchant has a lot of money, so he was wearing a multicolored clothes. And he sat proudly on his horse. Upon his head he wore a Flemish beaver hat, and his boots were buckled handsomely and elegantly. He spoke out his opinions quite impressively, pronouncing always the increase of his profits. He wished the sea to be guarded at all costs between the increase of his profits. So he was also a greedy man. Always you are looking at people who are different in their lifetimes. So merchant is always looking for profits. Merchant is a businessman basically. He wished the sea to be guarded at all costs because all his businesses were carried through seas. Remember, seas were very important back then, between Middleborough and Orwell. He knew well how to deal in foreign exchange. This worthy man, says Chaucer, used his wit very well, for no one could make out that he was in debt. He was so dignified in his conduct with his buying and selling and money lending. Truly he was a worthy man indeed, but to tell the truth, Chaucer says, he did not know what he was called. What he was called he did not know. So merchant is probably the wealthiest member of the rapidly rising middle class. We had talked about the middle class in yesterday's class. And when these external trade and commerce was increasing, and there was a huge expansion of money coming in and people getting more and more money, so the middle class was also becoming more and more important. Or that portrait begins a group of pilgrims that consist of people who had all characterized by their attitudes to material possessions. Though numerous and varied, difficult to classify as one group, they nevertheless share a love for money. The fashionably dressed merchant heads the list. Chaucer calls him worthy because this worthy is also a kind of a satire. He's a worthy but a corrupt man, but the word does not carry moral connotations here. The merchant is not worthy in the same sense as the knight was. The word is intended to imply criticism here for this man who is so blatantly dishonest and devious. The pilgrims, Chaucer calls him worthy for the last time on the portrait almost seems to have convey contempt for the merchant class. So he attacks the merchant class, that this tendency of taking away money, that only looking at profit and looking at opportunities and not caring about human beings is something that has been criticized here. Okay, now I'll just take a short pause here, and because I'm having some network issues, just give me 1 minute. I'll join within 1 minute again. Sorry, there was a small network interruption. So as I was talking, as we were talking, so he's talking about the merchant and the uh, greedy nature of the merchant. And before moving on to the next character, if anyone has anything to ask, please ask. I can see the hand of Shruti being raised here. So Shruti, I am allowing you to speak. Yes, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, Shruti.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, Shruti.
Sir, could you please tell me that what kind of monk he was? Like he wanted every luxury thing, and he was like a very pleasure-loving person. Like what kind of monk he was?
Yeah, that was the thing that I pointed out actually. The monk was a corrupt person. He had money which he had earned from other resources and which he had earned by maintaining relations with very rich people. So you can see that the representation of monk that Chaucer has made here is full of corruption, because a monk is supposed to be full of uh, kindness, and there shouldn't be any angle of pleasure. But this person had a lot of horses and loved hunting and all that. So it's a point, or it's an indication towards the corruption that were present in the contemporary England of Chaucer. Okay, is that clear now?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, could you please enable chat box?
The enabling of chat box is not in my hands. Actually, it is in the hands of the admin. And the admin people are not here.
Like we people who want to ask questions, we're just getting very confused, like where to ask. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can understand that. But
it's tricky just to raise hand and ask a question. I hope you understand.
Yeah, I can understand completely. But somehow this right is not in my hands. This is in the hands of the admin people.
Oh, it's okay, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Shruti. Any other questions from anyone? Anyone wishes to ask, they can raise your hand. At least raising the hand would make things easier. I cannot see any more raised hands. Yes, Anshu Mishra. Just a moment. Yes, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, Anshu.
Sir, amongst all of them, who is the most corrupt? The merchant.
What do you think?
I think the merchant is more corrupt.
No, actually the monk is more corrupt because the merchant is always corrupt. It is always understood that the merchant will always look for profit and he'll do this and that. But the monk is not expected to be corrupt. Monk is someone who should be religious and who should be ideal. So that is why I think the monk is the most corrupt of the entire group.
Okay, sir.
Yes, next question, please. Who would like to ask the next question? Anyone? See, this is a list of characters. This is a list of things that have been presented here. So if you have any doubts in your mind, you can ask. I don't know whether I cannot see the chat box has been enabled or not. But you can always raise your hand. Yes, Prachi.
Sir, is there any similarity between the monk and the merchant?
Yes, both of them are corrupt. That is the only similarity.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
And any other questions before I move on to the next character?
Good
Yes,
afternoon,
Khushbu.
sir.
Okay, Navodita, please ask.
Sir, I just want to ask a question that how can we differentiate between a merchant and the monk? Because as we know, they both of them were corrupt people in their own ways. So how can we differentiate between a monk and the monk and the merchant?
See, the differentiation, as I've already said, can be done only by one thing. The monk is not expected to be corrupt. The monk is someone who should be an ideal person, who should be away from all kinds of corruption. The merchant on one side is of course a person who looks for profit. So he has more chances of being corrupt. But this person, monk, is not expected to be corrupt. Your mic. So that is the only thing. Yes, Khushbu, you can ask a question. Khushbu, do you have anything to ask? Okay, I'm assuming that you don't have anything to ask. I'll move ahead with the teaching then. So let's move from the character of merchant and to the next character. That is the clerk, which is visible on your PDF on the screen now. The clerk, which is lines. Yes, please switch off your mics. We'll take your questions again later. This is the clerk, and clerk there was of Oxford also, and that unto Logan had go, so in moral virtue was his speech, and gladly wold he learn and gladly teach. There was also a clerk from Oxford who had begun his study of logic long ago. So a clerk is a learned person. A clerk is someone who works at the office and does things logically. His horse was as thin as a rake, and he too was not very fat, I affirm, says the narrator. He looked emaciated and moreover sober. His short overcoat was very threadbare, for he had not yet obtained an ecclesiastical living, nor were he worldly enough to take up a secular employment. for he would rather have at the head of his bed 20 books bound in black or red of Aristotle and his philosophy. So he was a person who used to read books, of Aristotle and also of philosophy, than having rich clothes or a fiddle or a gay psaltery. Even though he was a philosopher, he had but little gold in his coffer. So he was a person who had little money, but he had a lot of knowledge because he was working in an office. So you see different people, different preoccupations. Someone is a brave person, someone is a greedy person, someone is a learned person, someone has more money, someone has less money. So an external and extensive tapestry of the whole society has been presented here. Whatever he could get from his friends, he spent it all on books and on learning. He prayed diligently for the souls of those that gave him the means to attend the schools. He took most care and paid most attention to his studies. He did not speak one word more than was necessary, and that was said with due respect and formality, and was short and quick and full of high content. His speech was consonant with moral virtue, and he would gladly learn and happily teach. So he was a person who was an ideal person. He was free from corruption, and he always spent money on books and learning. He gave much value to learning. He gave much value to knowledge. So all kinds of characters have been presented here. So the next character is the sergeant of the law, someone whom in the present times we call the lawyer, or someone who looks after law, or whom is the custodian of law. A sergeant of the law bore and vice that often had been at the parvis, girt with a scent of silk, with a bar smell of his array tell I no longer tell. A sergeant of the law was also there who was wary and prudent, and had often been at the parvis or the porch of St. Paul's Cathedral, very rich in excellence. He was discreet and dignified, at least he seemed to be so since his words were so wise. He was often a judge in the local courts by letter of appointment with full commission. For his knowledge and his own renown, he had many of fees and robes given to him by his clients. There was nowhere such a great purchaser of land. In fact, all was unrestricted possession to him. His purchasing could not be invalidated. Now, there was nowhere so busy a man as he, and yet he seemed busier than he was. He knew how to express in legal terms all the cases and decisions and had occurred since the time of King William, almost 300 years ago. So he was also a learned man. He was also a man with a lot of experience. So he had worked, his forefathers has also worked with kings and queens, and he has a royal kind of lineage. Furthermore, he knew how to draw up a legal document so that no one could find a flaw in his writing. He knew every statute by heart. Statute means law. He rode simply in a multi-pattern coat tied with a belt of silk with small stripes. Chaucer stops here by saying that he can tell us no more about his clothing. His clothing, his manner, his nature, everything has been described. The sergeant of law. Now let's move on to the next character, which is the Franklin. A Franklin there was in his campaign, which was his beard, as is his days. There was a Franklin in the company of sergeant of law. So these are people who are legal. They are part of the legal business, and his beard was as white as a daisy. So he had a white beard. This was his complexion. Of his complexion or temperament, he was very cheerful. So he was very good. He was very welcoming. In the morning, he loved to have bread dipped in wine. His habits was always to live happily, for he was the son or the follower of Epicurus, who held the opinion that living for pleasure was the path to happiness. So he was a pleasure-loving person. He always wanted happiness in life, so he had a lot of money. He would spend that and live a life like a king. He was a householder, and that too a great one. He was St. Julian's patron saint of hospitality in his district. His bread, his ale was always of the same good quality. Nowhere was there a man who was so well stocked with wine. So he was a lover of wine. He used to have good food, good meat, good drinks, and good things to eat, so he was a lover of pleasure. He presided as Lord Justice at the peace at sessions of the country courts and was also member of parliament many times. So he was a rich man. A dagger and a purse of silk hung from his girdle belt, as white as morning milk. He had been a sheriff and an auditor, accountant of his shire. Nowhere was there such a worthy landowner. So he lived his life full of pleasure. He had a lot of money. He spent that money and could buy happiness for himself. So the Franklin was this kind of a person. The next character is also very important, is the five guildsmen. Now, who are these guildsmen? They are also part of the law. Read the detailed paraphrase again. This is the five guildsmen. This is the introduction to the five guildsmen, and you'll get to know who these five guildsmen are. So they are part of a different profession. So everyone, please read the detailed paraphrase of the five guildsmen. I'm giving you again 2 minutes, and after which I shall again resume and explain it to you who these five guildsmen are. Okay, I hope by now you have all read it. So this is the 5 guildsmen who were gripped by Chaucer. And move ahead and read the next portion. Now you have the cook. Now the interesting part of the cook, a cook they had with them for the nuns to boil the chickens with the merry bones, that on a shine a normal had he or blank manger, and had he with the best. The guildsmen have a cook with them for the occasion to boil the chickens with their marrow bones and tart flavoring powder and spices. So they're also taking along a cook with themselves who is there to make food for them, the 5 guildsmen. He knew well how to judge a draught of London ale. Ale means wine. And he also knew how to roast and boil and broil and fry, make a stew and bake a pie. But it seemed to me, says the narrator, that it was great harm that he had an open sore on his shin. But as far as white pudding goes, he made it the best. So he was a good cook, a talented cook, and he could make beautiful things like the pie and the other things. So all kinds of characters mentioned here. The shipman. This is the last character that we shall read today. I think we can continue in the next class. And by the meantime, you all read all these characters, understand all the words, and try to be familiar with the contents. The shipman was there, one fair by west. A shipman was there, dwelling far in the west. For all I know, says the narrator, he was from Dartmouth. He rode upon a chart house as best as he could groan, woolen cloth that reached to his knee. He had a dagger because shipman always travels for here and there, so he has to maintain his safety as well. Dagger is a knife hanging on a cord which went about his neck and down under his arm. The hot summer had made his hue all brown, and certainly he was a good fellow. He had drawn many a draught of wine, which, while coming from Bordeaux while the merchant slept, he cared little for a clear conscience. If he fought and had a cupper hand with pirates, then he sent his presents home by water to every country. But to talk of his skill, he could reckon well or know well his tides, his currents, and all the dangers around him. He knew well his harbors and the positions of the moon and his navigation, and Chaucer, the narrator, says that there was no one like him from Hull to Cartagena. He was strong and prudent in taking risks. His beard had been shaken by many a storms. He knew all the harbors as they were from Gotland to the Cape of Fenistry and every stream in Brittany and in Spain. Of course, because he takes a ship throughout the world, he knows all the places, and he was also learned in it that way. So he was a brave person and knew his ship was called Maudlin. So all characters till now what we have covered are covering different aspects of society. Someone is a cook, someone is a shipman, someone is a knight, someone is a squire, someone is a monk, someone is a merchant. So all these aspects, whoever is doing whatever through their occupation, have been presented by Chaucer, and by doing so, he's bringing out what the Middle English society of England looked like, what the kind of people were like, what was the condition of the church, what was the condition of the general people, how the poor people were living, how the rich people were corrupt, and how other characters were playing in this whole situation. So that is all that I was trying to tell you. Now, if you have any further questions, any final questions, because I think for today's class, we can keep it till here. We'll continue again in the next class. But till then, everyone, please read this first unit, which is Chaucer, and which you need to understand by reading it only. So if you have any questions, I can see the hand of Diksha has been raised. So Diksha, please unmute yourself and ask. Yes, Diksha.
Sir, can we say that the Prioress was the most religious amongst all of them?
Yes, Prioress was, of course, the most religious amongst all of them. That's true. And she was also quite honest compared to the others. Any other questions? You can raise your hand. I will unmute you. Yes, I can see the hand of Prachi. Yes, Prachi, you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Yes,
Sir,
Prachi,
may I
please.
audible?
Yes, yes.
Sir, the five guildsmen, can you explain this line? Also, their wives would will agree to it, or otherwise certainly they would be to blame. Sir, what is the meaning of this line?
That their wives knew the true characters of these people, what kind of people they were. The wives of these people knew that. Yes, Isha. Just a moment. Yes, Isha, you can ask a question.
Good afternoon, sir. What kind of question can come from this unit? Should we focus on the characters or their social background more?
Both the things. Mostly the social background, and you have to give examples from these characters. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yes, next is Sheetal. Just a moment. Okay. Anyone else has anything to ask? I don't see any more hands. Okay, Shruti, you have something to ask. Okay, yes, Shruti, please go ahead.
Sir, could you please tell me why the man of law used to follow Epicurus who, and who was Epicurus who? Why he used to follow him? Like
Okay,
he was his father?
No. Epicurus was a person, a deity, a kind of a god who believed that pleasure was everything in life. And because he was believer in that person, so he always thought that pleasure is the only way of life. Okay. He was not his father,
Okay,
but
sir.
a figure, a philosopher, or a figure whom he loved and followed.
So he used to follow a Saturn basically.
Yeah. A saint, basically.
Okay, sir.
A role model.
A saint. Okay, sir. And sir, what does that mean by harbors in the para of shipman?
Harbors means keeping close to. Harbors means when you keep close to something.
Okay, sir. What was the name of his ship?
Is it mentioned there? It's not important, so don't worry.
That is
The
okay,
name
sir.
of
That
the
was my
ship of the
query.
shipman is mentioned. It's Maud Lane, but if it's not mentioned anywhere else, it's not important.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you. Anyone else has anything to ask? Okay, so for now, we are good to go. So please read the first unit. You have some time before the next class. Please read the first unit and come for the next class. Whatever questions you have, keep it to yourselves. And I'll see if the chat box can be enabled in the next class, and we will have further discussions on this. But please read, download the book from the SL website. It's easily available. Read the PDF and come for the next class. Wherever questions you have, you keep it up to yourselves and we'll discuss that. So I conclude today's class here, and I'll see you again in the next class. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Shruti.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.